Hello and welcome to Life Lessons with Barbara. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Barbara Aline Johnson, and I'll be sharing lessons I've learned, mostly the hard way, from my many years of life experience, and some I've learned from others during almost 40 years as a counselor, therapist, and life coach. I am also the owner of BEJ and Associates, a transformational coaching and consulting company. We specialize, my team and I, in dismantling barriers that stand between you and the life you truly want to live, or that business you want to build or grow, or that relationship you've always wanted. And we have life coaches that can work with you one-on-one virtually, so it doesn't matter where you live. And we offer business consulting as well, which can be done virtually. So if you want to know more about the company, maybe a little more about life coaching, and if it's something that would benefit you, go to the website bej-associates.com and check us out. There's a lot of information at that website. Now, I'm going to take a moment here to give a huge shout out to Black Wall Street Radio because it rocks. And we're thrilled to have this great platform. Hey guys, I have another great show for you today. And I'm excited to be able to introduce to you yet another amazing associate with BEJ and Associates, and this time you're going to meet Terrence Perry, author, speaker, life coach, and a guy full of life lessons. You're going to hear a lot. But before we go into the show, I've got to bring your attention to that nice mellow tune playing in the background. Now that's none other than the fabulous Lois Lady Mac McMorris. This lead guitarist par excellence is performing her signature piece called After the Rain, which happens to be our theme song. To download After the Rain, or to hear some of her other tunes like Sister Line, or to even access Lady Mac's website, go to my website, and that is, again, bej-associates.com/radio. And once you're there, you can even access all of the shows that we've done. Just scroll down towards the bottom of the page, find the show you want to hear again, and not only will you be able to hear it, but also see it. And again, that website address is bej-associates.com/radio. Now, stay tuned to meet the phenomenal Terrence Perry. You are listening to Life Lessons with Barbara. Okay. Well, I'm excited to welcome to Life Lessons with Barbara, my associate and colleague and friend, Terrence Perry. Hi, Terrence.
Hey, Barbara, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay, great. I would like to just kind of tell the audience, because you may not know this, how I became aware of you and why I recruited you to BEJ and Associates. And the reason why, first of all, I wanted to have a diverse group, and I didn't have an African-American male. And I don't know how I saw you on Facebook, and I saw that you were a life coach. And I thought, because I don't know of any other ones. Do you? African Americans who are life coaches?
No, Now I do. Not at the time when you and I met. I didn't know any better.
Yeah, yeah, which
Since
was
then,
what, 3 years
I've
ago,
learned.
4 years ago?
Yeah, at
Yeah,
least.
right. And then when we met, I found out that you had worked with these really challenging populations. You know, people in early recovery, people coming out of the prison system, adolescents, you know, maybe high risk adolescents and all of that. And at the time we were working with this network of nonprofits, and those were the populations that they were working with to try to, you know, to get them on their feet financially. And so that's what I thought you would be perfect. And I'm glad that you were willing to join the team. Now, of course, we haven't had much work in that regard, so I haven't had the opportunity to really put you to work. But I'm glad that you hung in there with me, and I wanted to thank you publicly because a
Well,
new
I
day's
appreciate
coming.
it. And I've enjoyed it. Even though we haven't had a lot of work on that end, we still had a great camaraderie. So it's still been a good learning experience.
Exactly. And we're working on a project, sort of. I mean, you're the one that told me about what was happening at the ATR, Access to Recovery. And so because you shared that with me, I was able to, you know, to get a contract with them to do some life coaching. And so you were doing it too. So, hey, something came, something good came out of it financially. All right.
True.
So,
Yeah.
I wanted you to have the full reign of what we talk about today because you're an author and uh, you know you have your own business, you do your own coaching business and speaking engagements and all that. So out of all the things you do, I want you to decide what it is you want to tell the audience about.
Well, in particular, right now is about the books. Um, I'm a life coach, but I put I try to write a book every year in regards to the life coaching that I do with some of my background. So the books are more of my that's more of my favorite thing to do is to write the books and use them as life coaching tools. So
Uh,
I'm always excited to put my next book out and I utilize it as a coaching tool with everybody I work with, male and
yes.
female. There's 5 books, and the 5 books is on my website, terrenceperry.com. Just go to books, and there's the first book I did was Coaching in the Game of Life, and
Right.
then
I read
Reinventing
that one.
Yourself was the second book. Um, the third book was a workbook that was a part of the Coaching in the Game of Life, with Bring Your A Game, and that's a workbook
Yes.
with action steps. And
Mm-hmm.
the last 2 I did was America's Awakening, but the most recent one that was just released about a week ago was Life Mastery Begins with Healing the Hole in the Soul.
Wow.
So that's most current. That's the one that I'm promoting more so now than the last 4.
Mm. I'm looking forward to reading that. It's a really intriguing title. Well, I mean, do you want to give a little synopsis of the other ones? The
I
first
give
one
a
I did.
let me give a synopsis of this one since it's
Okay.
most recent.
Hey, you do what you want to do. Okay.
Yeah, let me give a synopsis of Life Mastery Begins with Healing the Hole in the Soul. That book is particular. It's a book, but it's also a workbook, and it has about 50 lesson plans in it. So
Wow.
I talk about the root cause of healing, the root cause of the hole in the soul, which usually goes back to childhood and a lot of the issues from childhood. But as we talk about those issues from childhood, I also bring up too, even in our adult life, a lot of times those issues have not been dealt with. So even as adults, we're still like those children inside. We're still dealing with the hole in the soul that occurred maybe during childhood or at
Yeah.
some point in your life.
They refer to that
And
as
like I said, I have about 50. Yeah. So I have
the inner
about
child.
50 lesson plans in the workbook
Mm-hmm.
that deals with those the inner child, but also it deals with the strategies and solutions to help to heal the hole in the soul. And some of those, I mean, you've heard of the CBT training, the cognitive behavior therapy, but I do a cognitive behavior training, which is similar to that. And also I do shadow work, which are and these are techniques and strategies used to help to heal the wound, the scars that we've encountered, during childhood and maybe our teen years.
Would he give it too much away for you to give us an example of one of those, how the worksheet or the workbook takes them through one of those processes? I mean, just to give people an idea of what they'll expect, or is it better left
No, I
to?
can give it. I mean, I can share it because it's a concept that I use. So yeah, I can share that one of the concepts,
Mm-hmm.
and one of it deals with the stages where it deals with the voice dialogue, and also it deals with the stages of um, say if you was wounded when you were a child 8 years old. So at 8, what I do is I have you to sit in a relaxed position, and we do some, imaginative visualization to where you'll sit back, you'll relax and think about the childhood memory. So I take a person back to that process in that stage of their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So I take the person at their present state to think back about their childhood. And in the present state that they're in as an adult, they embrace their 8-year-old self. So they have to entertain their 8-year-old self in their mind, and they get opportunity to hug and squeeze their 8-year-old child, which is
Yes.
themselves.
Yes.
And so they talk about their woundedness during that time.
Right.
The
Yes,
the
because
older self, yeah.
yeah,
Go
they
ahead.
are trying to suppress that part of themselves, and so you're telling them or giving them permission to not do that, but to embrace that child and that time in the life. So this is something that the person does on their own. They don't have to have a life coach walk them through it. You got all of the narrative and everything built into the book. Is that right?
Yeah, right, right. The narrative is built into the book,
Uh-huh.
but now I do say it is good to have a life coach or a therapist or a counselor if you have one to
Right.
to help you go through it, because when you're going through it, um, you know you don't know what's going to come up because it's sort of like purging,
Mm-hmm.
and so
Yeah.
you think
And,
one thing is going to be coming up, but it brings up a whole lot of issues
right.
a lot of times. So, but I do have the steps in the book to where a person can take themselves through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I say if you have a background in psychology or sociology or coaching or so, then I would say that they could do it themselves because they know what to expect. But if you
Mm-hmm.
have no idea what to expect, I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't necessarily do it unless I have someone. I would want to have either my close friend with me or
Mm-hmm.
a person that has a mental health background
Yes.
present.
And so you kind of give them a heads up in the book when they get into when they first are introduced to it, the opening, and you're recommending that? Because, some
Well,
people could just have a...
in the beginning of well, in the beginning of the book, um, there was about 4 or 5 chapters to where the first chapter is talking about broken bonds. So the first 4 chapters talk about not just the process, but to talk about childhood wounds and scars, to talk about narcissism and codependency. There are chapters that talk about all of these occurrences. Before the end of the book, we have the 50 lesson plans, and we also have the strategies and whatnot. So it's different phases of the book. The first part of the book is more entertainment. I talk about different famous people that have gone through, I'll say, drug abuse. For instance, like Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown. I talk about Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown's childhood. Then I talk about their marriage, and I talk about their addiction. Because we're talking about still the hole in the soul. So I show, I draw the lines to where it started. The root causes back in their childhood, and I bring it up to their present, to the point to where they either became addicted to, it could be opioid or street drugs or what have you. And I talk about Elvis Presley. I talk about Anna Nicole Smith. I talk about probably about 10 different famous people that had holes in their souls that they didn't deal with properly without the use of drugs, and how that led to their destruction. Even though they made lots of money and they did a lot of things, they wasn't healed. So they really didn't enjoy the lifestyle that they could have had. And so we talk about all of that before we get into the strategies that I talk about.
Oh.
That's one of the last chapters in the book, to where we actually do the exercises.
Oh, okay.
Before the exercises, we understand what happens, what happens before that in the lives of a lot of famous.
So the purpose for that is to give them an opportunity to see what this hole in the soul, how it manifests, by pointing to those folks. They had money and fame and everything, but still they didn't have true happiness, because there were these issues that they never dealt with, never resolved. So that was a pretty clever way of laying that out. Thank you for explaining it, because I kind of was concerned about somebody going right into doing that work without any preparation, without any. But
yeah, that would be taking them off the deep end.
I know
that would take them off the deep.
Yeah, we don't want that. But
they all deal with the hole in the soul.
They all do, even the first one.
All books are different, but they all deal with the hole in the soul. Once you go back to the root cause, in every book that I've done, if you look at it, if you read them, you'll see that there are what's in all the books. Everybody needs healing. Everybody needs emotional healing. And in every book that I wrote, that's one of the concepts that keeps showing up in every book that I do. That there's a healing that needs to take place.
And are you?
When I talk about, go ahead, Barbara.
I was going to ask you: are you in the process of healing? I mean,
definitely.
For you to be right, okay. And I noticed in the first book that you readily shared your own experiences. So do you continue that? Do you continue to share your own personal issues? And what do you call it? the ways that you were able to resolve some of those holes that you found within you. I don't have the advantage of having read the other books, but I did read the first one, and that was one of the things that really impressed me, that you were so, you know, open about your own journey. So I was just wondering if you continued that in your other books.
Well, in the other books, I kind of just talk about my own journey when I talk about the author's bio.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about my, you know, the bio part of my book, it details about my personal journey.
Oh,
But
okay.
in the book itself, I kind of take myself out of it because I don't
Okay.
want every book to be about me. Like you said, the
Oh.
first book had enough about me. But the book is a journey.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you laughing, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
no,
didn't
I
want
was
every book to
just
be about
thinking,
me.
you gave an example of narcissism, and I'm thinking, you know, our president and how everything's about him. So, you know, for you to say you didn't want all your books to be about you, it just kind of, I don't know. It just struck me funny. But I mean, I think that's great, you know, and you do share, but it's in the bio that you provide in your book. So, because some people want to know.
And each time I add the bio, each time I add the bio, I do put a little bit more in it about my journey and the process of what I'm going through or have gone through. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I have to keep sharing that because it's not always the same. I may have shared my childhood in one of the books, and I may have shared my early adult life in another book, and then I may have shared my last 10 or 7. I think the last 7 years in this book. I talked about, well, actually, I talked about the whole journey from, you know, as when I was growing up, I was a stutterer. So I kind of talk about me as a stutterer in this last book, as well as the journey, my, you know, getting addicted to alcohol and getting past that.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of talk about that process and, you know, me healing the hole in my own soul.
Yes.
So not only do I talk the talk, I walk the walk, and you know, I kind of share that in. I have videos where I share it. I have, like I said, a little bit of it in the book, but it's not about me as much.
Yes.
It's about me as well as everybody else. I don't exclude me. I actually include me, but I don't make myself the focal point.
Yes, and I think it was really clever to, you know, to look at famous people who, you know, most of your readers will know. If not, I mean, they'll probably know all of them. I don't know who else, but you mentioned Whitney Houston, Bobby Brown, but so
You know Marvin Gaye.
yeah, you put him in there too.
Marvin Gaye, yeah, I use Marvin Gaye, and I could use him in. I've used him in several of my books because his story is so deep. You know, from his childhood,
dad took him out.
Roots. You know, everybody know about his music, and a lot of people know about his drug addiction to an extent, but they don't know about the childhood abuse that he went through, and his father being a preacher, a cross dresser, and he had.
Where'd you get all this information? No, I didn't know all that.
Yeah.
Well, I knew you love New York, huh? That's what your cup.
Marvin Gaye's mother is from North Carolina.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Marvin Gaye's mother is actually, she's from Rocky Mount, which is about probably 30 minutes from where I grew up.
Oh.
So, his mother's from Rocky Mount, North Carolina.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
Yeah, roots right here in Rocky Mount.
Oh, had no idea. So, that, I mean, that was good because you're pointing out people who, because a lot of times people with those holes, when when we're still got this gaping, unhealed part of us, think that money, fame, or the perfect relationship or the perfect job or whatever is going to fill it. And for you to point out people who are actually self-actualizing. I mean, they're doing their thing and they have all this fame and stuff, but still have the hole in the soul. So yeah, I think that's pretty
And
clever. Yeah.
that's why I go back to the name of my last book is Life Mastery begins with healing the hole in the soul, because you can't master your whole life for a lifetime if those holes have not been healed, or if you're still dealing with those childhood issues. We all
Exactly.
have issues all the time, but if you're still dealing with those issues from childhood, then certainly you have a whole lot, you have a whole lot piled up on you to actually deal with. And if you haven't dealt with those childhood issues and emotionally, you're still a child. You're
Hmm.
operating, you may be 30, 40, 50, or 60 years old, but you're still operating as that 8 or 9, 5-year-old child emotionally.
Right.
And
Like
that's a big deal,
that
because you
is.
can't really see it.
I mean, when it's the person can't see it, but other people can see that there's something wrong. Other
Right.
people can see,
Once they
but
get to know, once they get to know that person, once they
hmm
get to know that person and the way that person reacts, because a lot of times people react from emotional triggers. They, things that happen later in life, it triggers those childhood memories,
puts them
and they
right
keep
back.
coming back up. So
Hmm.
yeah, takes you right back
Yeah.
to that. It could be a traumatic experience, or you just may have been yelled at or called stupid, or you just may have had a lot of put downs. You
Yes.
never felt good enough or smart enough, or just not enough. A lot of times
Hmm.
you get those messages, and that's what's programmed in your mind.
Yeah.
Emotionally, that's why I say you're still a child, because that programming is what keeps you stuck. And if you don't, if you don't purge all that and or get all of that out of your system, then you continue to deal with those patterns over and over and over. And we see
Exactly.
it all the time,
Hmm.
in ruined lives, in addictive lives,
Hmm.
in codependency, and in the Donald Trump syndrome, I
Yeah.
call narcissism.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a classic
Yeah,
case of
he's a
somebody that's
classic.
got everything, but that there's definitely something missing. So and usually there's an overcompensation. Person who feels really inferior will overcompensate and come across very superior. And it's like with that hole, you find ways to cover it up or to hide it or disguise it. And when you're a kid, you just do what you need to do to feel okay. And and um but those kinds of behaviors will cause problems down the road, if not
And
immediately. And so, since you were talking about your stuttering and whatever else were your wounds, did that kind of take you to pursuing your degree in psychology because you're trying to fix yourself? Because that's why I did it. I mean, really. I mean, what attracted you to psychology? Because both of us did that. It wasn't it. Didn't you want to get some insight into yourself or into other people? Which was it?
well, I was like I said, I was a stutterer all through growing up. I was always a stutterer, so I didn't talk to a lot of people, but I did read a lot. So my mother had a psychology book laying around when I was about 10 or 12 years old, and I would read that psychology book all the time. But at the same time, I was growing up being a stutterer, and by the time I got to be a teenager, I started drinking and smoking marijuana at 13 years old. So by the time I was 16, you know, I thought I was a grown man. And I knew because I was stuttering, I wasn't planning on going to college. So I had planned on being a bricklayer. That was what my chosen field. So I started taking that vocation to be a bricklayer. But as life has it, when I finished high school and I laid bricks for about 2 months full time, and the guy told me, my boss told me I wasn't, well, I can't say the words that he said, but he let me know that I wasn't a good bricklayer.
Well, you got him to thank, because your life would have been a whole lot different.
And I got my father, because by the time I was 16, I was rebellious, because I started hanging out, partying and drinking and not coming home at night. So my father would lock me out, and I would stay out and party even longer. So he told me I needed to go in the military. So I didn't want to go in the military because he told me. I didn't want to go to college initially, but after I didn't do well in bricklaying, college was my third option. So my third option became, I said, well, I might as well major in psychology since I'm going to college. And I did, but, you know, and I stopped stuttering. I asked God to take the stuttering away my second semester of my freshman year. I asked God if he would take the stuttering away, I could do anything I wanted to do.
Yes.
And instantly, 2 weeks later, I was standing in front of my class. I had to do a speech, and I didn't stutter. So at that point, I knew I could do anything.
Yay. So you attribute it to prayer. That made the difference for you.
Yeah. But now there was another time, about 15 years later, I had to ask God again to take some away, because I was still drinking. So I had to ask God to take the drinking away, because even though I stopped stuttering, I had picked up, you know, the habit of drinking. So that was still affecting me. I didn't realize it until I got a DWI. Then I realized, well, actually, I got another DWI after the first one, about 15 years later. So then I had to ask myself, what was I covering up? What's not healed? What am I covering up? And that's when I began to really question. You know, you start doing the soul search. And I had to do some deep soul searching. I had to go all the way back to my childhood. And I went back to the days when I was a stutterer during my childhood, and I was picked at and picked on and bullied. So that's a lot of that I hadn't dealt with as an adult, and a lot of the self-worth and self-esteem, you know, that was still bothering me. But I didn't realize it because I was partying all the time and drinking. So I guess I didn't have to feel the pain, pain and the shame. But yeah, I had to go back and deal with those issues, and that's kind of why a lot of the themes in most of my books are about healing those childhood wounds. Because if you talk to most people, and I talk to a whole lot of people, their issues usually goes back to something in their childhood. Even in school, if there's a friend of mine, she's a beautiful young lady, but she was picked on real harshly in school because she was smarter than everybody, she looked better than everybody, and she was real gifted. But the students at school, they made her feel like she wasn't anything.
Jealousy.
Because they was jealous of her gifts and talents. And until she went to college and met people on an adult level, then she realized how beautiful she was. You know, she went on to be very successful. But when we were growing up in school, she felt less than.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
So bad.
Yeah, I grew up in the projects and, all kinds of stigma, you know, and I was struggling to overcome those things. Um, and, uh, and sometimes, we buy into the labels that other people give us. And, and at some point you got to be your own judge. You've got to decide who you are. And so what I want to ask you is, how did you get, and this is in terms of your profession, your aspirations, how did you get from being okay with being a bricklayer, even though you weren't any good at it, to where you are now? I mean, there's something in you that keeps you aspiring to greater things. So where did that inspiration come from?
Well, part of it came from my actually my bricklaying instructor. My bricklaying instructor was, I mean, he always taught us entrepreneurship. Even as a bricklayer, he was teaching me then, don't just be a bricklayer. As after you learn the trade, go into business for yourself.
Own your own
That's
company.
what he was preaching.
Yes.
Yeah, own your own company. So
Oh.
the guys that told me I wasn't going to be anything were actually guys that graduated a couple of years before I did, and they started their own bricklaying company. I went to work with those guys, and they the ones
Oh.
that said I wasn't. Yeah, I knew those guys in high school.
Mm-hmm.
They graduated before me, and they started their own company. But it was our bricklaying instructor that encouraged us to go into business for ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And um, my father always had a cleaning service business on the side. He was a mental health worker himself, but he always had a cleaning service business on the side.
Uh-huh.
So I've always, that's always been a part of, I guess my DNA is to you work for other people, but always have in the back of you, in the back of your mind to work for yourself, because only when you work for yourself can you do as much as you want to do and earn as much as you want to earn if you put forth the effort to make it happen. Working for somebody else, you can never do that. And I realized that early.
Mm-hmm.
So I just had to get past my my demons,
Yeah.
the stuttering early on, and then it was the drinking after then.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got past those two stumbling blocks, then again with faith, I knew I could do anything about could stay focused and just see a project through.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way that's just the way I've taught myself to move forward. Don't give up on anything that I try. You know, to keep trying until it's done, unless I just get tired of it and don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
But things that you're really passionate about, you're not gonna get tired of it. The other reason I got into psychology too is, like I said, I was a teenager. I was a rebellious teenager. So after college, I worked with teenagers for 20 years.
Yeah.
And within that 20 years of working with teenagers, I started my own business 10 years after working with teenagers. I had my own business for 10 years. I had about 4 group homes for teenage boys and teenage girls that had behavior issues and they had behavior issues and sexual issues.
Mm.
So I did that until I got tired of doing that.
For girls too?
Yeah, because when I was working when I started to working in the mental health field, I worked with teenage boys and girls. So I worked with a lot of girls that had, that had been sexually abused.
Mm.
So by the time I started, the business, I had already been working with teenage boys and teenage girls. So that became part of my background, was being able to work with both, the male and female. But the original idea came because of my rebelliousness as a teenage male myself.
You could really relate to
and I used to read psychology all the time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow. But you got tired of that. running the
I
group
got well. I
homes?
mean, I did it for I was working with kids for about 25. By then, I had worked with kids for about 28 years.
Yeah,
And
that's
after
long enough.
28 years, I mean, I was really just tired of it. I
Yeah.
wanted to work with the parents because I was getting older, but the kids were still the same age. And I'm like, hey, I need to deal with these parents. I kept running into kids that had became adults, and I would
Yeah.
run into them. And they said, yeah, when I was 15, you used to work with me. And they were in their 30s and in their 40s. So I was like, wow, that's a long time. And I
Mhm.
had burned out in working with, I mean, at some point you burn out if you keep doing the same thing. And I'm not saying that for everybody, but me,
Mhm.
the same population over and over and over.
Um,
And then it was with
I totally
with
understand
the
that.
court system. And, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
After a while you burn out. So
Right.
I have to switch it up a little bit.
Yes.
And that's why I kind of got into coaching and working with adults, just to switch gears from working with teenagers, um, because the root cause of what a teenager, um, it comes from the apple don't fall far from the trees. So
Yes.
they're just when you when you when you trace that back, you're looking at the parents. Actually, the parents produce that fruit. So
Yes.
I'd rather deal with the parents.
Right. Exactly. And I, because I've been in the mental health field too for all these years, and um, you are looking at when you look at these parents, and everybody wants to scapegoat them and blame them for everything, but if you look deep enough, you'll find that they're the same kids that never got the help they needed. So just because they grow up
Right.
and so to me, I think that's really good work, and I think that's the only time the trickle down theory really works is when you can make impact with I got him on my mind, obviously, but when you can make an impact on the parents, you know, any insight they gain, any bad habits they overcome, any parenting training you can give them, all those things will trickle down and be advantageous for the child. It'll help break the cycle. So I think that's really good work. And you had the perspective of being a difficult teenager yourself and then working with them all these years and and when you work with the adults you can see probably some of the same attitudes, um but you know how to relate to them, and so that's good work. I think very important work. I think the ills of our society especially um could be a lot better when we strengthen the family. And so we don't get a lot of rewards doing that work, but it's good work to do. So, okay. Another thing you do, I mean, did you want to talk more about your book before we move on? You were talking
No,
about,
let's move on. No,
you
no,
ready?
let's move on.
Okay. Okay, because
Move
you
on.
have another you
Okay.
have another ministry too. You have a similar one to this one. You do a TV podcast. What do you call it? Your
Yeah, it's
relationships
a
workshops. Why don't you talk about that for a
yeah, it's
bit?
a two. Well, the one on I do two. I do the podcast about relationships, and I do the podcast now about life mastery.
Oh, I didn't
And
know.
yeah, they're two separate because when I'm talking about relationships, that's just focused on adult, relationships, and pretty much the same thing that we've just talked about. A lot of that plays out in the relationships. These triggers, these childhood wounds,
Mm-hmm.
all of that plays out in relationships, but the people can't see it themselves. So they always point the finger at the other person, but they don't realize that thumb is pointing back at them all the time. So when
Mm-hmm.
we're addressing the relationship issues, to me is funny because it's always the blame game. It's
Mm-hmm.
always the blame game, and when I'm hearing that, I'm looking at the person that's telling me what the other person did because it's projection.
Yeah.
They're only projecting and that goes both ways. Both people are projecting
Okay.
what they're
So
not dealing with. Go
you
ahead.
you you talk about what you talk about relationships that have failed then. And do you also talk about or have guests on that talk about relationships that are working?
Yeah, I usually have a panel. I usually have a panel of guests. I usually have a panel of guests on the relationships. It's usually three or four, and there's usually a psychologist present. There's usually myself, the life coach, and there's usually a panel member that's going through a relationship problem. And then there's usually a fourth person just to be objective, but they're not always objective. But yeah, so those people are on the panel, you know, and we
Mm-hmm.
just have a discussion. It's not always negative or positive. Sometimes it comes out positive. Sometimes it's about a negative. But for the most part, we try to find the value, the solutions, and the strategies to a positive relationship. So one of the people that we talk about all the time is Gary Chapman, because he wrote the book, the five love languages.
Oh
And
yes, I
once
read
you
that.
understand yeah, so once you understand those love languages, then you begin to understand what the other person needs, what the other person wants, and that person can understand what you need and want, and then that can help you all relate better. But
Mm-hmm.
most people don't understand, what the other person really need in that relationship. So
And
the
some
relationship is doomed because.
and don't you
Go
think
ahead. If
sometimes they're okay? Don't you think sometimes they're more focused on the what they're not getting as opposed to focusing on what the other person needs? I mean,
Yeah, all the time.
all the time, right? And
Yeah,
that's again,
all the
like you
time.
said it. So this really was a good segue because we were talking about your book and healing the wounds from your past and how they manifest in relationships. And so if a person like, this one I've alluded to all day, if they haven't healed, you know, then it's always going to be about them. It's it really it arrests a person's maturation process gets arrested where they
Right.
just can't grow up really. And so I think probably that's the crux of most issues in relationships is that unresolved stuff that was never dealt with, and they're looking outside of themselves or looking for this person to fix it for them. That's been that's been a discovery of mine, working with people, and I mostly work with women.
Yeah.
Actually, it was once I became a life coach. Other than the substance abuse and addiction treatment, all my clients typically are female, and so I had been only getting that perspective, but I started working with guys, especially as a life coach, but even as a EAP counselor, I started getting men, assigned to me, and it was like really a revelation to me. Like I, I
Yeah.
I didn't know there was so much depth to you guys. Really, we always kind of never mind. I'm telling too much of myself, but anyway. So I've learned a lot just working with people. Uh, yeah, there's in my case, I'm still trying to figure out how to fill that void of growing up without my father in the home. without any contact with him.
Oh,
Actually, you know, after I was, I think maybe 2 or 3, and I don't know what, you know, how to totally fix that. Um, so that's why I went into psychology because I thought maybe the answers were there. But yeah, over time, sometimes you just have to adapt. You have to fix it the best way you can, and because you can't go back and relive it, you know, and you can't go back and choose different circumstances. You can't go back, period. So you have what
well,
you
Barbara,
have, and then you do your best to be your own. You know, in my case, I had to be my own father, my own mother. You know, I had to learn how to love and take care of me and my needs. And but that's something that some people may live their whole lifetime and never know to do. They'll always be disappointed looking for other people to do those things or to be
right.
that for them. So,
We're always looking for validation.
yes.
We're always looking for validation when we, particularly when you don't have a parent, a father, or mother that validated you as a child. And that's one of the things that I talk about in my new book, Life Master Begins with Healing the Hole in the Soul. I talk about the daddyless daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Because in talking about the daddyless daughter is just what you just said. A lot of times there are women now, but they were girls then that didn't have their father, and a lot of that is relived and played out in their in their lives, trying to trying to find daddy, and not feeling love, feeling
Mm-hmm.
like because daddy they feel like they, I mean, the sense of abandonment,
Mm-hmm.
and as they say, daddy gone. It ain't no it ain't no verb or vowel or anything. It's just daddy gone.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to deal with it's like you said, you have to deal with that from the standpoint at which you are. Now, as a child, you may not deal with it, at best, but at some point as an adult, either you deal with that because there's a hole in the soul, and you find ways to cope and you find strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're gonna self-destruct. And there are a lot of women that have self-destruct in many ways because that void was not was not filled.
Because they didn't
The
get that
validation
validation. Yeah.
also was not there.
Mm-hmm.
And the story of the story in the Bible where they talk where Leah talks about her father Laban and her sister that took her man Rachel, Leah and Rachel in the Bible, the two sisters,
Uh-huh.
uh, and but they are at odds with each other because their father didn't never validate it. He validated Rachel. He called her the prettiest, and she was, the one that he loved most. But Leah did not get the validation, not from her husband, not from her daddy. And I won't tell you, I mean, everybody know the story, but
No,
that's
everybody
that's a
don't know
big
the
story
story.
that
I'm
you
waiting to hear the
uh,
story.
well,
I don't know that
you got
story.
a homework assignment now.
Oh, no, I
You
don't.
got a homework assignment. You got an assignment
So
now
you're not going to tell me
because
how it ends, huh?
that no, that story is crucial to a lot of women that are not validated. Once they read and know that story, they'll, what I'm saying, they'll get that aha moment, and
Oh,
that'll validate.
oh.
Yeah. I
I
can't
feel
tell the
pretty
story here.
validated
You
now,
go home.
but I've been around and around about it, but I finally came to terms, and I
Oh yeah.
figured it out that the solution is within me, and that I can be that for myself by acknowledging that inner
Right.
child and all that stuff. I've done that work, and I use it too in my work. But okay, so you're going to refer me to the Bible. I will check that out just because I'm curious. Yeah.
Well, get my book, the America's Awakening. It I break it down in that book. So the book is out now is Life Mastery. Life Mastery begins with healing the whole in the soul, and
Okay.
all five of my books are a series. So all of the books are dealing with some part of the healing that whole in your soul. Every book has that theme. It's the underlying theme in all my books. Finding
Okay.
that healing yourself. Um, and those
Okay.
books is on. You can go to terrenceperry.com to find those books, or you can go to Amazon.
Yes.
And Barbara, I
Okay.
do want to say I appreciate you having me. I appreciate you being patient enough to wait for me.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it. All
Thank
right,
you. Thank you.
all right, Barbara.
Take care.
All right, bye bye.
Bye. Well, that's the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed meeting Terrence Perry and gained a lot of wisdom from all that he had to share. I tell you, I'm just amazed. I knew my associates were awesome, but to get to interview them, I've learned even so much more about them and have even more admiration. So, anyway, with that said, I want to remind you all to check out the website and all the goodies that are there. Again, that's bej-associates.com. Now, if you want to hear this show again, you'll select the tab that says radio, and it'll take you to the program archive. This show that you just heard is number 11. If you want to contact us about life coaching or anything else that you've heard on the show or that you read on the website, leave your contact information. There's plenty of buttons all over that website where you can click on Contact Us. You'll get a drop-down menu where you can select the kind of inquiry you're making, and you can leave your contact information. And one of us will get back to you within the next 48 hours. Now, as always, we close the show with a life lesson, and Mr. Terrence Perry was very generous. So there's a lot to pick from. But first, I want to just remind you of the name of his book, and you might want to check it out. Sounds like a real good read and a good way to soul search. And the title is Life Mastery Begins with Healing the Hole in Your Soul. And the life lesson that jumped out at me was, and be willing to take that inner journey to find out who you really are. And then once you know that, be the best version of yourself you can be. Have a great week. Namaste.
BEJ and Associates LLC offers a broad array of services, including life coaching to help achieve your personal goals, planning, facilitation, and presentations of workshops, seminars, and conferences, various customized services, diverse and personalized addictions intervention, and organizational staff development. We specialize in dismantling barriers to individual and organizational achievement. BEJ and Associates. Enlighten, inspire, motivate at bej-associates.com.